Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another segment of our series, Classical Greek Values and Modern Realities, sponsored by the Aristotle and Alexander Press. Today's segment, History and Politics, the lessons of history, Herodotus, Thucydides, Plutarch, and Alexander the Great. Ladies and gentlemen, let us welcome Harrison Sheppard.
Thank you, Dimitri. It's very good to be back. When we talk about history and politics, we're talking about those who make history and those who write it. In terms of the classical ideal, the very first historians of the West, of course, were Greek historians. Herodotus is considered the father of history, having written the first historical text. Thucydides, who wrote the great account of the Peloponnesian War, remains one of the great moral teachers about the lessons that we can learn from history. And Plutarch, whose lives of eminent Greeks and Romans, noble Greeks and Romans, was a standard text in education in the West for over 1,500 years to help to educate young people to what it meant to act virtuously or nobly and what it meant to act ignobly and viciously. The models of Plutarch's lives educated political leaders for over 1,000 years in the West by seeing what Plutarch had to say about the lives of people like Caesar and Alexander the Great. Now that brings us to the people who make history rather than write it. The greatest figure of antiquity, of course, was Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great not only then, it's commonly said, conquered the known world. His conquests were so extensive that he is supposed to have wept at the age of 30 because there was nothing left to conquer, can teach us a great deal about modern realities. The greatness of Alexander was partly that when he did conquer an area, he didn't simply subjugate it and demand that the people of other nations comply simply with Macedonian or Greek habits. He chose to be what we call cosmopolitan and recognize the legitimate customs and aspirations of foreign peoples. Instead of drawing a circle that shut them out, he drew circles that took them in. We have a great deal to learn in terms of modern realities from what Alexander, the greatest general of all time, whose work is still studied, whose strategy is still studied in military academies, including West Point, about how we should relate in our international relations. We're presently in a crisis in the United States in terms of the attitude that other nations have toward us, not only because of the war in Iraq, but because of what we've been doing in many of our practices that may injure other nations, such as our excessive use of high-energy fuels that may be contributing to global warming. We have lost, I think, to some extent, that decent respect for the opinions of mankind, which the founders of the United States had articulated in the Declaration of Independence when they wanted to justify their political actions in separating from England. The classical ideal and modern reality with which we should be concerned when we consider history and politics from the time of ancient Greece is something that Thucydides taught us in the Melian dialogue in the rivalry between principle and power. A nation that does not conduct its affairs on the basis of principle and not mere power is likely to collapse, as we've seen through history. And as far as Alexander's lessons are concerned, the modern reality that we need to revive, that we need to incorporate from what we can learn from the classical Greek ideal, is a better understanding and a more harmonious relationship to the people of other nations. There's a chapter on this subject devoted in the book Too Much for Our Own Good as to how American power politics and American practices need to learn panmetron ariston even in our international relations.
Are the ancient Greek historians still relevant today? And what about the claim of some of the modern scholars that say that the ancient historians got their facts wrong?
The great ancient historians, Herodotus and Thucydides and Plutarch, are highly relevant today for students of politics and history. it's true that they did not have the same scholarly regard for facts that modern historians feel responsible to on their faculties and their university reviewing committees. But the ancient historians were not as interested in scholarship as they were in moral and principled illustrations. You can tell a story that is not fact, but that embodies truth. That's the whole realm of poetry, and drama does that. And the ancient historians were a combination of factual and poetic accounts in order to make a moral point, moral points from which we can still learn. In Herodotus, for example, there's a famous exchange between Solon and Croesus, in which the wise man Solon tells Croesus, "Count no man happy until he's dead." What that means is something we can still learn from if we read Herodotus. In Thucydides, the great dialogue between the Melians and the Athenians, when they are discussing whether nations should be ruled by principle or mere power politics, is something that I know for a fact is still discussed among diplomats at the United Nations. Do nations only have interests, or do nations have principles? I hope that here in the United States, we have enough of a notion of the classical ideal that in our modern reality, we still want to adhere to principles and not simply function as a powerful empire. Finally, with respect to Plutarch, even if some of his stories are not literally true, his accounts of the ancient Greeks and Romans still provide very dramatic and instructive models of what it means to be a ruler and obey and follow principle and leadership in ways that we can admire or ways that we might detest. So I would say that there's a great deal to learn still in terms of our interest in modern realities from Herodotus, Thucydides, and Plutarch. Whether or not they got all their facts right, they certainly had a lot of truth to tell us.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for watching, and do not forget to join us next Saturday. The subject will be the fine and dramatic arts from Homer to Hollywood. Harrison, thank you very much. We'll see you next Saturday.
Look forward to it.